lamps trimmed and burning, trimmed and burning, trimmed and burning now. See what the Lord has done, brother. Don't be worried, don't be worried, don't be worried now. Trimmed and burning, trimmed and burning, trimmed and burning now. See what the Lord has done, sister. Don't be worried, don't be worried, don't be worried now. Thanks for being here. Thanks so much. Usually I just play in a bar or something like that. And it's not this quiet. But sometimes they let me play in a library, and then they want me to talk about stuff, but there nobody's drinking beer or anything. So this is kind of some weird, like, little bit of all of it at the same time. Can everybody hear me okay? This is okay? Okay, good. So I think what's going to happen is I'm going to get the talking on kind of out of the way. We're going to talk through this first half of this, and I'll put some songs in there, here and there, hopefully to give some context, and then we'll take them, and then we can have questions, and we can talk about all sorts of stuff. And then in the second half, I think I'll just play, and you can mingle, and we'll go from there. So that song, that's probably one of the oldest songs I know. It's just called "Keep Your Lamps Trimmed and Burning." It's a gospel song. It's a Bible song. It's been sung by a whole lot of different people, and it's often referred to a style called country blues, is what I'm playing here. And country blues has nothing really to do with country music, but it has everything to do with music from the country, as in not from the city. So that's where country blues kind of came about. Most of us have experienced or heard urban blues, Chicago blues, or Memphis blues, and like Memphis blues is B.B. King with the band and the electric guitar, and Chicago blues is Muddy Waters and the electrified harmonica and those grooves and drum kits and all that sort of stuff. it happened before that, but people didn't have electric guitars as readily, or they didn't have drum kits as readily. What they really had was pianos. But then pianos they were heavy and you couldn't travel with them. And pianos broke and not everyone knew how to fix them. And that's kind of where guitars ended up filling the gap, because there was some good... It's funny, like the biggest advancement for the popularization of the guitar is better glue, because they used to not be able to hold together, because they used to be made out of it's called horse glue or whatever. And those guitars were great, but they would like last us. And if everyone's been to Mississippi in the summer, like there's no glue that's going to hold a 99% humidity. So all the guitars would just fail. But then there's new advancement in you could call that technology. We just got better glue, which meant that the guitars were stable, and then they could throw them in a case or not, and you could travel with them, and they would relatively stay in tune, and you could play night after night for people. But the music that people had heard was piano music, which at that time was like a lot of ragtime piano, which is like the busy left hand stuff, and then you put the pretty stuff over the top. I can't do that. I'm just pretending like I can do that, but I can't play ragtime piano. So that was like what was informing. That was like what people heard, and that was what people wanted to dance to and whatnot. So guitar players started trying to do that, just trying to make the most racket they could with the guitar. So what that did was invented this style called country blues, where you get, most like we see guitar players and they're strumming, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's some great songs and there's some great strumming like that. But when I first heard country blues and people were doing this. Well, that just comes from piano music, which is totally nuts. That people figured out how to move it from piano to guitar in a way to give rhythm and a bass, and then you just put a melody. Some people knew church songs, but then people started making up their own songs, blues songs, and all that sort of stuff, and that's how we get country blues. So what the big conundrum is why am I here? Having grown up in Arden Hills, Minnesota, and now I'm sitting here, in Granite Falls, and we're talking about country blues. That's the weird story. But maybe not, I don't find my life exceptionally interesting or anything like that. But it's like a lot of others, I guess. You see someone playing guitar and you just want to do that. I mean, that's kind of as simple as that for me. Sadly, there were probably lots of moments, but in order to boil it down, I feel like the moment is, and I'm sorry if you're not following this reference, but in the movie Back to the Future, Marty McFly culminates to the whole movie in playing Johnny B. Good and being Chuck Berry in the movie. That's a kind of a not a super exciting first origin story or whatever you want to call it, but I think essentially that is kind of what it came down to. So after that, I was super interested in, I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, and just obsessing about guitar and pursuing guitar, and my parents, who were very kind and generous and still are, bought me a guitar for Christmas, and then that kind of, opened my mind to the possibility that you can make a racket, and it can be good. It took a while. Some days I feel like it still is tough to get it to make it sound like a good racket. But it was that music, it's Chuck Berry, which is, it's rock and roll, it's blues. And then from there it goes to I mean, my parents had all those Beatles and Rolling Stones records, the early ones, because my parents are a little older. So it was the Beatles records where they're only doing Little Richard songs, and the Stones records where they're only singing Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry songs. Which I didn't know that at that point, but it was just cool music. It was just great music. So I got to that point and just loved that, and I still couldn't play it. Still couldn't play it at all. But that was the music that I was just like super excited about. And then I got a teacher through a long and convoluted story. My mother was a science teacher at a Catholic school, which is the Catholic school that I went to. And one of her teaching partners had a nephew who was in a band and who was not making enough money in the band, and so wanted to teach lessons. And so he connected me and his nephew's my first teacher. And I remember on the first lesson, he's like, "What are you listening to?" And I kind of was like, at that point, I was still kind of keeping it hid that I liked blues in a lot of ways. Because it was difficult to talk to my 12-year-old friends about Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry. We could talk about Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains, and I'm happy to do that. Still bands that I very much enjoy. But I was keeping it hid, so I'm in this lesson, and then he's like, "Well, what music do you guys like?" And so I was telling him that stuff, and he's just like shaking his head. No, he's like, "Next time I'm gonna bring some CDs." And so he brought me a stack of CDs that he just straight up gave me. So it was that generosity that really set me off. But it was another incremental step. I mean, it was Jimi Hendrix, which was kind of, again, not all that crazy for any teenage boy, especially, to get into that music. But he gave me a CD called Jimi Hendrix Blues, which was on the cover just a mosaic, essentially, of Jimi, but made up of hundreds of portraits of blues players. And then on the inside, there was an index of just all these 100-something names. So I would just go to the library and I would like get the first person on the list and like find them, find Muddy Waters, find Tom Perkins, find the next person, Memphis Slim, and just like keep going. And it was just like endless, yet exciting feeling of discovery. And I feel like I was hearing the connections immediately from that to that, and I liked the older stuff better, which was kind of weird. So anyways, that's kind of where we get to me going down the rabbit hole of like blues music. But it's more complicated than that, because I was still listening to other music, and then at the same time I was developing an interest in listening to jazz. And so like all these were like three, I mean, you can see them as like three separate trains are going at the same time, but it's all the same. It's just like I later organized in my head as just being a complete love affair with American music, like all this music that is uniquely American music that came out of the disastrous situation of slavery and oppression is the only situation that could have formed all these different forms of music, blues and jazz and country and initial rock and roll and hip hop and heavy metal, and like it all kind of came because of that. And that's not to disregard any other one else's influences in it. There's great European bands and a bunch of great music from the rest of the world. But that's what I'm just like, of late I've decided that it's just all American music that I connect with deeply. And there's been such great examples about who can play it and why and with what means or without what means, like with whatever you've got, you can do something, whether it's jazz or blues or country or rock and roll. Because most of us got something to say, hopefully. So anyways, that's kind of, we'll leave it there. I got off a tangent. Also mentioned earlier about questions. If anyone has questions, or if they want to hear me talk about something more in depth, which I can't imagine anyone would, but you sure could present it.
I have a question.
Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Talk about Alan Lomax and Gopher and Ray.
Yeah. So Alan Lomax, who I guess I don't. Well, Alan Lomax's father was John Lomax, correct? Is that way?
Sure.
So
I know a little bit about it, so I thought you could.
yeah. So Alan Lomax is the most recent person, and he spent a lot of time driving around the country with recording equipment in the trunk of his car, and just recording any music possible. But he learned this from his father, John Lomax, and this was probably, John was in the 20s and 30s, I believe, and he worked for the Library of Congress, and his charge was to preserve American music and collect examples of it. But John was doing this at a time when there wasn't a whole lot of recording equipment. So what John Lomax collected was sheet music of cowboy songs, of spirituals, and you can find these books. They're called like the American Folk Song Compendium or something like that. But then Alan kind of took that and ran with it with the technology, which is to be able to record, and ran all over the Deep South, and but then all over the world. You can get Alan Lomax recordings. I have a record of Alan Lomax records Scottish folk songs on the island of whatever. And so he just became, in like Haiti and all this stuff. And the best part about all this is all this hit the Alan Lomax Foundation website. All of his recordings you can just go listen to, and there's no money involved. And it's just a true library of music from around the world. But what he ended up doing is recording a lot of blues performers and a lot of their records that he had recorded out of the trunk of his car. They were released commercially, and he brought Leadbelly out on the road, and there's a lot of contradiction in what was happening around then. Like Leadbelly was forced or coerced to go perform in prison stripes and kind of play this character that he wasn't. So there's a lot of tough stuff in that, but at the same time, Leadbelly brought his songs all over the world and all over the country. So that's Lomax, and I found some of those recordings when I was younger, and they were spectacular. Primarily those of Mississippi Fred McDowell. I first encountered his music through an Alan Lomax recording. And then you also brought up Kerner, Ray, and Glover, who were Minnesota, West Bank heroes and still are. Spider John is still alive, and kind of, in a way, were involved in the folk music boom of the '60s, but at the same time didn't want anything to do with they were kind of like punk rock about their way of doing it, and they were loyal to the Viking Bar and the Triangle Bar and the Palmer's down the West Bank, and had some, had relative fame and played with all sorts of different people, but didn't want to or get trapped up in all that other stuff. I can't speak for them. Spider John's the only one who's still alive. But in a way, when I learned about them, that helped me kind of negotiate my position in playing blues music, being from Minnesota, and to say that I am in an odd sort of way part of a tradition and something that is bigger than me, and I'm not carving out, I'm not inventing anything, I'm not doing anything new. People have been doing this for a long time, and it's important. and most of the people enjoy it, and that's super important. So does that kind of get at?
Yeah.
Is there another question? Immediately, otherwise I'll just keep going on. Maybe now's a good time for another song. I'll do another one here. I'll play one of mine. Well, it's cold down by the river. You know, if he was here now, you really think he'd be a believer? Oh, what's the matter? Oh, what's the use? I think he must have left this town. I think he must have left this town. I think he must have left this town. He's on a boat to St. Louis. When I was thinking about what I was going to talk about during this whole thing, I was thinking about myself and learning to play music, in a lot of ways teaching myself to play music, or it was kind of me and my two friends teaching each other how to play music. And it's not good to learn something from someone else who doesn't know what they're doing. But it's the three of us knuckleheads kind of like learning together, and that was great. But I was thinking about my youth, and it's kind of a weird situation to come out of that and play music. All of my, like at that point, all of my musical heroes were from completely different planets than I was. Jimi Hendrix and John Lee Hooker and Charlie Parker. I mean, these are black men who grew up in a totally different time period, under a totally different set of circumstances. And yet that was who I wanted to be in a lot of respects. I didn't know any musicians. I didn't know anybody who played music, really. And as like a 12-year-old, I don't think I knew a single black person. And I'm like, but the people that I idolize, my heroes, are black musicians. And what about my work? Like I was thinking about that, and that's just such a wild situation to be in. And thinking about it, but I think that's true today. You know, thinking about anyone who wants, like a little girl who wants to be a scientist. Like she may not have a lot of scientists in her daily life, but how do you get to that point? You know, or like I'd have a conversation about. Quite often about people ask me like, well, how do I teach my kid guitar or whatever? And I have some ideas, but generally I don't know. But especially young girls, like who are they wanting to emulate as far as guitar players go? And there's not a lot of concrete examples, which it would be better if there were, but that, it means it's not impossible. Like the fact that my hero can be John Lee Hooker and Charlie Parker, and I can end up here is weird, and I'm grateful for it, but it has a lot to do with my privilege and whatnot. I don't know where else I was going to go from there.
So are you feeling guilty because of that? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I don't think I feel guilty about it. I think I'm just more it's such an interesting place to be, to have your heroes, but then to not have a way to meet them. Yeah, you can't study them. Like everyone who I've studied at that level. I've tried
to meet Spider-Man all my life, and it ain't
happened. Right, exactly. I mean, this is the thing, and but even I didn't have there weren't musicians around in my youth, in my family, or in the suburbs, or in Catholic school. But all the clubs were, like, music was just not a part of my culture growing up, really, until a certain point in that it was, you know. Yeah.
Don't you think that is why you play the blues you do? I mean, I play in a band and we play some blues, we play, Stevie Ray and stuff, and it's different than what you're playing.
Sure.
You're playing a really unique style, and I mean, maybe that's why you developed this unique style. I mean, that I hear the old blues players play, and that's cool. Good job.
Right. I appreciate that. There's a great story. So Pete Seeger, the banjo player and storyteller, and kind of Johnny Appleseed of our times, in the best sense of that analogy. He grew up in a very musical family, but they apparently the story from Pete Seeger about his family was they didn't listen to records, and his mother and father both said, if you want music in your life, you need to make it, because we're not going to listen to it, like, we're going to play it. Which is kind of a wild situation to be in there. That's never the case. I've been constantly surrounded by anything I want to listen to, and that has been, I feel like that's been helpful, because there's just been no barriers. We can jump from this CD to that CD, and there's just like this luxury of genres and accessibility in our public libraries and in our life, and then now with the internet and all that sort of stuff. So that I think that's become special, but at the same time, yeah, like, I can't, like, I don't have a true, like, teacher telling me that anything's wrong.
It's a good thing you didn't grow up with the monkeys like I did.
Right. So, all that said, I've come to become friends with and a student of Jimmy Duck Holmes, who lives in Bentonia, Mississippi, who runs the Bluefront Cafe, which he's run it for 40 years now, and he took it over from his parents who started it. And it is the oldest juke joint, the longest continually running juke joint in the state of Mississippi. That's how Jimmy says it, but that one I tend to say, wouldn't that mean then it's the oldest juke joint in the world, Jimmy? I mean, you can talk about it like that. He's like, no, this is just Mississippi. They got them in Arkansas too. They got them in Louisiana too. And there's some that might be older. So I met Jimmy Duck. The years don't matter. I guess 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. I was going to Louisiana pretty often to visit my childhood friend who I was learning to play guitar from, and he was learning to play bass when we were kids. And he was living in Louisiana, and on one of the trips home, I wanted to go to the town of Bentonia, Mississippi, which is where someone named Skip James is from. And some of Skip James's records were some of my absolute favorite. Let's see, it's kind of a less of a cultural touchstone now, but that movie, Oh Brother Where Art Thou, there's like one blues song in it, Hard Time Killing 4 Blues. That's the Skip James song. And so that was like, that's how most people kind of know that, but it's a spooky blues, it's a different kind of blues, it's not that, it's a whole nother planet. And Skip James was on this planet.
Like, did you ever listen to any Cat Benoit from Louisiana, kind of down there in that area, that kind of? See, your music kind of reminds me of that kind of stuff.
That's cool. I found it much later in life, but not at that point. So I was leaving Louisiana and had the opportunity to go to Bentonia, which is where Skip James is from, and I hadn't spent a whole lot of time in Mississippi. He's dead, and he's not even buried there. He left Bentonia as soon as he could, according to his biographical information. But I want to see this small town that he was from. It's only like 300 people, and it's not Clarksdale, it's not Jackson, it's not Vicksburg, it's not any of these places. It's Bentonia, and so we roll into Bentonia, and the street is 2 blocks, but it's only half a block. Imagine the other side of the street being the railroad track, and then that's Bentonia. So we got this block and we got one other, and like that's downtown. And the only place that's happening is called the Blue Front Cafe. And so we go walking up there, and there's a guy standing outside, and he comes right up to me and he grabs my hand. He goes, "I'm Jimmy Duck Holmes. I'm the one you're looking for."
Crazy.
And so I said, "Okay, nice to meet you." He showed us around. We spent about 20 minutes there. And then we left, you know. And then that was kind of it. At that point, I had no idea that Jimmy was a guitar player himself and a singer. But I learned that he ran the Blue Front Cafe, which is a cool spot. So a handful of years after that, my friend Dave, who's a harmonica player up in Duluth, called and said, "Trying to bring Jimmy Duck up to Minnesota. Can you help set up some shows, maybe down in Winona, and jump on some of these other ones and play?" And I said, "Absolutely, let's do it." So I think it was like half a dozen shows, maybe 6, that got set up, and 2 of them I was included on, which was great. But the first stop was Winona, and Jimmy hadn't been playing outside of Mississippi a whole lot, so this was kind of his first tour of sorts of late. I think he had done some traveling like a long time ago, but this is kind of a new thing. And he came to Minnesota, and we just had a great hot, muggy show in July at this old church that was no longer a church, and he just had a blast, and people in Winona loved him. And I opened up for him there, and then after that, he invited me down to come play his festival, the Bentonia Blues Festival. And then I've been down to the Blue Front a couple times since then, and then and then it was 2 years ago that then we traveled to the Vancouver International Folk Festival together, kind of it was him, but I was like playing guitar for him or under him, you know, kind of adding some cool stuff, and that was a blast. And we've done a handful of things like that, and he's kind of become a mentor of sorts in those sorts of ways. He's taught me a handful of like the Bentonia songs, the Bentonia style, but more so, I think what I've learned from him is just like watching him as a bluesman, as a, you know, like on the stage and like telling the stories and keep bringing the people in, you know, because like I think that's more of what it is. Like there's a lot more theater involved in blues and jazz than we tend to think about, and that's why, as a recorded art form, they don't do it like blues and jazz. You need to be in the room with the people doing it, which, you know, I listen to blues and jazz records all day long, and rock and roll records all day long, but there's something about being in front and when people do it well, it's music and it's theater, and it's a whole nother world. And learning that from Jimmy, not that I can do that, but I've been able to say, that's good. Like, that's really good. Not that I have I haven't really cultivated that in myself yet, or might not be able to. But, so that's kind of like was the biggest thing. It was like, whoa, it's not really about, it is about the music, but it's about, there's something different, you know? It's like the MSG and the whole thing. The thing we don't talk about, but it's there, and it makes it great. So, Jimmy Duck learned to play a guitar from a guy named Jack Owens. And Jack's no longer alive, but he has a couple of great recordings out as well. Alan Lomax stopped by and recorded him. There's some amazing video of Jack Owens and his playing partner, Bud Spires, who's a harmonica player. And those guys were an amazing duo. Bud Spires was blind, not entirely, but mostly. People in Bentonia call him Blind Bud. But when he and Jack would play, they would sit usually across from each other and their knees would touch. And that's not usually the way you see grown men playing music together. It is such a special and beautiful way to see these guys play music. And part of that, Jack would Jack would give Bud the tempo before the songs would start, and you could feel it on his knee. And he wouldn't need to count anything off, and they would just like start and like they had this really wild relationship. I'm gonna try to play a song by Jack now. So you heard about the Bentonia style. So what that is it starts with how they tune their guitars. So this is kind of a standard delta tuning right here. It's not standard guitar tuning like country music tuning, where you make irregular chords. That's different. The chord's already here, so you don't need to even touch the guitar, and you got a chord, you know. But in Bentonia, what they do is they take one string and they move it just a half step out of whack. So then that's your starting place, which in musical terms, we just moved it from major to minor, which is not a big deal. That's music all day long. It's major chords, minor chords, major chord, minor. But as far as when you're talking about open tuning, it just adds a whole nother layer of spookiness and eeriness to everything that happens after that. And it kind of takes the magic out of it if you just call it, we're just going to tune the string a half step lower to the minor. Like that's not the, like, when you say we're going to go to the Bentonia tuning, like there's it's sticky and it's, yeah. So, this is on by Jack Owens. And it is all that stuff I said about the Bentonia being mostly spooky. This song is not spooky at all, and it's light and airy, which is also really cool to do that in a minor tuning, musically speaking. It's called Jack Ain't Had No Water, and it's not about Jack himself, it's about his mule. Jack used to live outside of Bentonia and keep cows and animals, and I guess people in town say that he would be out there on his porch playing every night to the animals. And so this is one of the songs. You can find a great recording, and it goes on for 17, 18 minutes, and it is riveting every second, to me at least, like his delivery and guitar playing. I'm going to play a much shorter version, so don't worry. gone. Ain't had no blues now since that day been done. Thank you. Now, is there anything anyone wants to talk about different?
I hate to dominate, but I wanted to ask you, can you talk about the history of the slide? Like, who first used it? How did that come about?
Oh, man. I don't know who first used it. I imagine it goes back to, I think it goes well before Robert Johnson. I think it goes probably back to the African continent, and it's possibly present on other continents as well. This one is made out of glass, blown glass to be fancy about it. But people used to use cow bones. People used to use broken bottles.
We were having this conversation the other day.
Yeah.
Chicken bones.
Chicken bones.
Hard enough to do
You can
the
use
job,
anything.
Find them around.
You can use anything. Yep. And the other thing that I'm using here is called a capo, and this just raises the pitch. And people have been using these for a long time, but not this fancy. They call them clamps, and again, you take a cow bone, and then you take a piece of rope and just tie it, and then it would raise the pitch of your guitar. I saw a photograph of a guitar player from Mali in northern Africa just recently, and he's got a Bic pen and about 40 rubber bands around both ends as his capo. So these things that I guess we're considering are unique to American music go well far and like way deeper than any of that. And a lot of what the idea of some of these tunings and tuning your guitar to something different than standard tuning, that comes from banjo playing, and that comes directly from the African continent as well, in North Africa. I'll switch, I'll show you something. There's kind of two schools of banjo playing, called three-finger, like the Scruggs style. That's like bluegrass banjo. But then there's another way called claw hammer, which I used to be able to play claw hammer. So it's, you make your hand like the claw and the hammer, and then you like get this rhythm going on it. So you kind of like that's the form, which I can't really do on this right now. I'm sorry about that. But that immediately translated into put your guitar in the same tuning as a banjo, which is this. And then you literally play almost claw hammer like, and then you get kind of a different school of country blues called this is more hill country. People like R.L. Burnside and Fred McDowell and Rainey Burnett, and then even John Lee Hooker is kind of in that school a little bit. But it's again a whole nother way of playing it. This is blues guitar, but it's sure not Stevie Ray Vaughan or even Robert Johnson. It has more to do with banjo playing than anything else, you know, and it's pretty heavy. And then you put a little backbeat on it, and it just like gets. So there's no chords in that. There's one chord in that, which is true of a lot of banjo songs. You tune a banjo. The banjos, sometimes they play chords, but sometimes they just play one chord. And there's a drone note. And a lot of that music goes straight back to music that is still coming out of Mali and North Africa. And a lot of that music has a whole lot to do with banjo playing. That's still happening today in North Carolina. So it's just how you accent the beats. In North Carolina, they're not getting that funky with their banjos, but they're still pretty funky in another sense of that old time music. It's just about how you slightly alter your accents, and it can make a whole world of difference. And that's how we get all these different. That's why I'm so interested in this, because it's so insane how you can get all these variations, and it can be so effective to move people, and to have them watch other people do this. You learn a song needs to have chords and a chorus, and then I go to a bridge, and then I go back to a thing, and then it's like, it doesn't need to. It's cool when it does, and they're great songs, and I'm not getting down on any of those songs, but to learn that, you can just play. If you got a room full of people and they just want to dance, you can just play this, and it's great. But you can also tell a story over the top of that, and the people that want to listen to that story can engage on that level, or you can just dance. And all that is great, and that's why I love this music in particular, yeah. We've almost been doing this for an hour, and I feel like we're getting ready for a break unless there's another question or two, and then I'll keep my answer short, and then we'll take a break. But if there's no pressing questions, and I think it will come back, and maybe I'll just play a little more and do less talk, more rock in the second half. Yes, Melissa. Sure.
But how do we bring the blues around into social movements in this country and practice?
Right. Well, blues has always been there. Music has always been there. American music has always been there. And I think my first inclinations as to the power of music in social movements is seeing that it's usually the bands and the musicians who integrated first and who wanted to hang out first. And it wasn't out of any idea of that notion of color blindness, I don't see him as white, or I don't see him as black. I don't think that was true. I think it was more we have different stories and skill sets, and when they come together, you get Booker T and the MGs, and when they come together, you get Sly and the Family Stone, and those are big sounds, which are culturally prohibited at that time, but when they came together, those stories and sounds that came out of bands like that, or Ornette Coleman's first group, where they took on a nerdy white bass player. The music that came out of that band, because Charlie Hayden was in the room, was because Ornette Coleman and Don Cherry wanted Charlie Hayden in that room, and vice versa. That's why you get those advancements musically, but also advancements culturally, because those were happening first. And yeah, does that kind of get? So that was kind of some of the first examples of whoa. And to address subject matter that might be prohibited culturally. We're just going to sing raunchy songs, or in-your-face political songs, or maybe subtle political songs, and I think that that music has always challenged sensibilities and pushed social movements, whether it's intentionally or not. I think we can go on and on and on and on and on from there, but I think that's where I'll leave that example for me. Yeah. Should we break now? 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and do some more. Thanks, everybody. face. I'd never known, you know, I'm leaving here today. He's down the road and I'm too far gone. Oh, well, I'm too far gone. Give us a little bit of space now, come on, slack the ropes. You know, leaving here today on a junkie boat. I think it's false now. Everything needs a big steering wheel. Better grab a rail now. Take care of standing there. Too far gone. Oh well, I'm too far gone. Yes, I'm older than you. Where you come from now, where you going to? Take care when you leave. What are you willing to lose? Tell me all of your now. Tell me all of your bad news. Is that funny, is it? Oh, well, I'm too far gone. Oh, well, I'm too far gone. You know, I'm not fighting anymore. I'm leaving it all behind. Not 'cause I'm not winning, I just don't really feel like trying. Show me a face I've never known. You know, I'm leaving here today. He's down the road and I'm too far gone. Oh, well, I'm too far gone. You know, I'm giving up, I'm letting you take the wheel, 'cause you nearly bashed my face right in. That's somewhere I've never been. What are you willing to lose? Tell me all of your now, tell me all of your bad news. It's not funny, is it? Oh, well, I'm too far gone. Oh, well, I'm too far gone. Oh, well, I'm too far. Well, I've been looking for something, you know, I ain't found. Well, I'm looking over here now, looking underground. Somebody, thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for sticking around. I know I said I was going to talk less in this half. I'm going to try to stick to that, but there's a couple things that I feel like I neglected to talk about a significant piece of my blues learning experience, and that was moonshine, which I hadn't ever had proper until I went to Mississippi. But even then, I was told it wasn't proper because it was from Alabama. The guy from Alabama brought it, moonshine, so it was Alabama moonshine, which is different than real moonshine. So it always had that qualifier on it. But the idea of the juke joint, and I mean, I feel like whiskey and moonshine was always a big part of that, because the story that I've read about and heard is that the enslaved people were put in charge of literally everything on the plantations, including making the whiskey for the plantation owners. And they would always be sure to make a little extra for themselves. And when the weekend would come around and someone like Charlie Patton would roll into town and play music, Charlie Patton would play music for everybody, just for the drinking and a couple of coins, which isn't necessarily a great thing. But that said, that's a significant piece of blues culture for sure, that we don't really have up here in the Puritan, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Caucasian.
No, it's more than that. It's our different religious sensibilities or whatever. But that said, yeah, nurturing nature again. And I just heard this story that the Jack Daniels company finally let it out that the Jack Daniels learned to make whiskey from a black man who was enslaved by his father, something like that. I flagged that story. I've been meaning to go back and read it, but I haven't. So it might be interesting. And yeah, and I guess they're putting out a line of whiskey with the gentleman's name on it, in an effort to do something, I suppose. We can still do more questions this round, but I'm gonna just play a couple more songs here. That was a song called Too Far Gone. I made that one up, but it never kind of falls too far. This guitar is in what we call G tuning, which I guess is banjo tuning.
So what's the name?
That guitar was in E tuning, which is like kind of standard delta tuning, but G tuning is all over the place. Dobros in country music are typically in G tuning. Banjos are in G tuning. I think, isn't this, I don't know what violin is? Is that the last 4 strings there? Okay, that's the other way. Okay, I'm getting them all confused. But I'll do another song here in G tuning. This one, I live in Winona, and I feel like you gotta write a blues song about a train at some point. And I live in Winona, and we get the Amtrak train, the Empire Builder. So I kind of made this one up, though it's kind of Son House had a song a long time ago called the Empire State, because there was a line called the Empire State Line, which went from up the New York route. And so Son House had a song about the Empire State Line. But this one's about the Empire Builder, which kind of runs right by my house. And then this groove is not really a Son House groove at all. This is kind of more of something that I learned more from like John Lee Hooker, which he learned from his step-uncle, taught him everything he knew about playing boogie guitar. So the song's called The Empire Builder. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. You kind of pick that, so that's kind of where guitar playing and claw hammer banjo meet a little bit. Something interesting about the history of recorded blues music is that a lot of these players that we now call blues players, they just got recorded playing blues because the recording company thought that that's what would sell the best. But a lot of these players would play a ton of different styles. They would play spirituals, they call them special songs, like dance songs, even like square dance kind of style songs. So they would sit down in front of the microphone and they're like, what do you want me to play? And then they just play your blues. And then from that point on, they'd be known as a blues performer. So a lot of these players play all sorts of different stuff. That said, I played some different stuff too. In Mississippi, a couple of these songs were referred to as Minnesota blues, which I think we can all agree means not blues at all. So I'm going to play you one of these Minnesota blues songs. That I feel like it's true are not like necessarily blues in their chordal ways or whatever, but I think everything I learned from blues guitar playing went into playing some of these songs like this. Let's see, which one let's do. One night only, this night for sure. Tonight I'm lonely, not over so. And I'm getting tired and a little under. Tell me a story I've never heard. It's all over now. It's all over now. Tonight I'm lonely and out of her soul. I'm gonna play another song that's called Rose Hill, and I guess I put it together. Rose Hill refers to the dirt road that Jack Owens taught Jimmy Duck Holmes how to play guitar in Bentonia, Mississippi, where he lived outside of town. And I have a CD and a record back there called Rose Hill that I recorded with Jimmy Duck at the Bluefront Cafe a couple years ago. And it's a kind of a super, it's like, I mean, as far as my life, like a bit of a, up to this point, a culmination of blues life and appreciation and being welcomed down there so warmly. And this song, Rose Hill, much like the last tune, kind of has, from the outside, I guess, has like nothing to do with blues music. Apart from, for me, everything that I'm doing guitar-wise was directly informed by learning to play guitar from all these other players, mostly blues players. So, yeah, and I feel like there's just like I don't know, you listen to, there's one particular song by Blind Willie Johnson called Dark Was the Night, Cold Was the Ground, and that's one of the first instrumental like blueses, and doesn't have any of those typical chord changes, but it's definitely a blues in the sense where like it's soulful, and you know there's like you can feel something, and I guess that's what music is, I guess. So this song's called Rose Hill. That's not it. This song's called Rat Gut Devil. Okay, we got about like 10 minutes left. Here's the choose your own adventure portion. Would you like Mike to keep talking, or would you like Mike to play another song? So, anyone's okay. All right, right on. Thanks for being so honest.
Shut up and play.
I appreciate that. That's kind of that's.
You have one last question, a short one.
All right.
Do you have any theories why musicians are attracted to river towns?
Ooh.
And what the connection is, between Winona and the Mississippi Delta? It's crazy down there. It's just like so flat.
Answer to your first question is no. Answer to your second question is yes. Yeah, we'll talk afterwards. This is a song by the great Booker White. He was from Aberdeen, Mississippi, and he made a whole host of recordings in the 1929, 1930, 1933, and then he kind of disappeared for a while, and then he came back around during the folk revival in the 60s, and just like apparently hadn't touched a guitar in 30 years or whatever, and just like picked it up and just took right off. So this is a song by Booker White. everyone who makes this place what it is. Thanks for doing what you do. Thanks for the invitation to come and talk too much and play too little. I appreciate you so much. I'm going to finish how we started with the folk song, which that just means we don't know who wrote the song. And it's been changed a lot along the way, so it doesn't fit neatly with our intellectual property laws. Which is good. It's good to challenge them on that stuff once in a while. All right. Lay down, my dear brother. Lay down and take your rest. Won't you lay your head upon your Savior's breast? I love you, oh, but Jesus loves you the best. And I bid you good night, good night, good night. Lay down, my dear sister. Lay down and take your rest. Won't you lay your head upon your Savior's breast? I love you, oh, but Jesus loves you the best. And I bid you good night, good night, good night. And I bid you good night, good night, good night. Thanks, everybody.